When the train passes through Golmud station, at an elevation of 2,809 meters above sea level, a train attendant begins walking through the carriages with a box of plastic tubes. Each tube is disposable, sealed in its own bag, about the length of a pencil. She hands one to every passenger. The tube connects to a small outlet beside each berth and each seat. The oxygen supply system has just been switched on. The hardest part of the journey is about to begin. The attendant keeps one tube for herself. She puts it in the front pocket of her uniform. Every passenger on this train might need that tube. So might she. Here is the question almost nobody asks about the world's highest railway. What does it take to work a 44-hour shift on a train where the air itself is a problem? Not just for the passengers, for the crew who are managing them, monitoring them, and trying to do a normal job in an environment where a normal breath delivers roughly half the oxygen it would at sea level. The answer involves two different engineering systems running simultaneously, a medical team that boards halfway through the journey, and a track built on ground that would shift beneath the rails if anyone stopped keeping it frozen. Here is where it starts. The Qinghai-Tibet Railway runs 1,956 kilometers between Xining and Lhasa in approximately 44 hours. It is the highest railway in the world, with an average elevation above 4,000 meters and a highest point at the Tanggula Pass of 5,072 meters. At that elevation, the air outside the train's sealed windows contains roughly half the oxygen molecules per breath as at sea level. The crew who make the beds, serve the meals, and walk the carriages checking on passengers do so in an environment that would, without intervention, cause altitude sickness in every person aboard. That is not a metaphor for how demanding the job is. It is the literal engineering problem the train was designed to solve, for passengers and crew alike. The train is staffed by a crew of attendants who work the full route in shifts. They are trained in altitude sickness recognition as a core part of the job. They carry pulse oximeters, small devices that clip to a fingertip and measure blood oxygen saturation, and walk the carriages periodically checking whether anyone's readings have dropped to a level that requires intervention. A reading above 90% is generally acceptable at altitude. Below 85%, the individual oxygen tube is no longer sufficient and medical attention is needed. The attendants have seen both ends of that range enough times to recognize the signs before the numbers confirm them. The particular stillness of someone conserving energy because breathing has become effortful, the reluctance to speak. When the train reaches Golmud, a doctor and a nurse board. At 5,072 meters, a passenger whose oxygen saturation drops to a serious level cannot simply be told to rest. The medical staff carry an electrocardiogram machine, anti-altitude sickness medication, and first aid supplies. They respond to the emergency buttons installed in every toilet compartment. A red button that triggers an immediate response because the toilets are where passengers who feel unwell tend to go and where they are most likely to be found in difficulty. But the job changes the moment the train leaves Golmud. The oxygen supply system operates in two modes simultaneously. The first is diffusion. Oxygen produced by generators aboard the train is mixed into the air conditioning system and distributed throughout each carriage. The system does not run for the entire journey. When the train departs Xining and travels through the lower elevations of Qinghai province, the carriages operate on normal air. When the train passes through Golmud and begins its climb toward the plateau, the system switches on and stays on for the remainder of the route to Lhasa. That activation is the signal that the journey has entered a different category, not just geographically, but physiologically. The attendants know it is coming. They have already distributed the tubes. The second system is individual. At every berth, at every seat, there is a small outlet in the wall. The disposable tube connects to this outlet. A passenger managing fine with the diffusion system uses it as a backup. A passenger who is struggling uses it actively. The attendant who distributed the tubes checks on the passengers who looked uncertain when she handed them out. She has learned to read the early signs. The passenger who accepts the tube but sets it aside, who gets quieter as the altitude rises, who stops looking out the window. Those are the passengers she checks first on her next walk through the carriage. The carriages were designed for this environment by Bombardier, the Canadian company better known for making aircraft components. The cars are pressurized in a way standard railway rolling stock is not, with sealed windows that also filter ultraviolet radiation. UV intensity at 5,000 meters is significantly higher than at sea level. The windows look like ordinary train windows. They are not. Each one is a multi-layer assembly with UV filtering properties built into the glass, and the frames are sealed against any air exchange with the outside. The train, in functional terms, is closer to an aircraft cabin than to a conventional railway carriage. Below the track, a different engineering problem was already solved before the first train ever ran. Approximately 550 kilometers of the Qinghai-Tibet Railway sits on permafrost, ground frozen year-round that depends on remaining frozen to support the weight of a railway embankment. The embankment itself acts as an insulator, trapping heat from the sun and from passing trains, gradually warming the ground and causing the permafrost to thaw. Thawed permafrost loses structural integrity. An embankment on thawing permafrost will subside, tilt, and eventually fail. The engineers working on this line knew this before the first rail was laid. Every previous study of a possible Tibet railway had concluded that the permafrost problem had no affordable solution. The solution they eventually built was not cheap. It was simply the only one that worked at scale. The engineers solved this with thermosiphons, metal tubes approximately 10 meters long and 20 centimeters in diameter, driven into the ground along both sides of the embankment. Each one contains roughly 9 liters of ammonia at the bottom. At low temperatures, the ammonia absorbs heat from the surrounding earth. When it warms enough to vaporize, it rises to the top of the tube, where the colder air outside causes it to condense and release the absorbed heat into the atmosphere. The cycle runs passively, requiring no power source. As long as the outside temperature is cold enough to condense the ammonia at the top, which on the Tibetan plateau for most of the year it is, the thermosiphon removes heat from the permafrost and keeps it frozen. The ground temperature beneath the embankment is monitored continuously. A warming trend in those readings is not a maintenance concern. It is a structural emergency. Where thermosiphons were not sufficient, the engineers built bridges. There are 675 bridges on the Qinghai-Tibet Railway. Not because the terrain required them for crossing rivers, but because a bridge deck sits above the permafrost rather than on it, allowing air to circulate beneath and preventing the thermal disturbance that an embankment would cause. The bridges and the thermosiphons together are the precondition for everything else on this railway. The oxygen system, the UV glass, the medical team, the attendant with the tube in her front pocket. None of it matters if the track itself is not stable. The engineers solved the ground problem first. Inside the train, the crew navigates a different kind of constraint. If you are finding this useful, hit subscribe. We cover stories like this every week. The attendants on the Qinghai-Tibet Railway are selected partly for their physiological tolerance to altitude. Working a shift at 4,000 to 5,000 meters is not the same as visiting at that altitude. A visitor has the option of resting when they feel unwell. An attendant whose carriage contains 60 passengers, some of whom are pressing the emergency button, does not. The diffusion oxygen system in the crew areas keeps the ambient level higher than the outside air. The same system that protects the passengers protects the crew, but it does not eliminate the physiological effects of sustained work at elevation. It manages them. That management has limits. A crossing in which everything goes smoothly, in which no passenger requires the individual supply and no emergency button is pressed and the Tanggula Pass is crossed without incident, is still a crossing in which every crew member has spent 8 or more hours working at an elevation above the cruising altitude of some propeller aircraft. Between shifts, crew members rest in their own compartments at the rear of the train. The attendant who has walked the length of the carriage checking on passengers comes back to a room where the oxygen outlet is there if she needs it. She has done this route enough times to know that the worst period is the approach to Tanggula Pass, which the train reaches in the early hours of the morning on most schedules. The pass takes approximately 20 minutes to cross. During those 20 minutes, the train is at the highest point on any railway in the world. The attendants on duty walk the carriages more frequently than at any other point on the route. The ones who are off shift tend to sleep lightly, if they sleep at all, until the train begins to descend. When the train descends from the pass, the oxygen concentration outside starts to recover. The attendant collects the used tubes and notes which passengers use the individual supply. Some of them will put the tube aside when she hands it out at Golmud, set it on the shelf above their berth, and not think about it again. She has learned which passengers those are likely to be. She checks on them more often. The tube in her own front pocket stays there until Lhasa. This is the fourth train in this series. The California Zephyr runs 51 hours across 2 American time zones, with a sleeping car attendant whose 4 hours of guaranteed rest per night are written into a union contract because no regulation required it to be. The Trans-Siberian runs 147 hours across 8 time zones, with a Provodnitsa who keeps a samovar of boiling water running through Siberian darkness while a Moscow clock tells her what time it is supposed to be. The Indian Pacific runs 65 hours across the straightest railway on Earth, with a chef who loaded everything he needed in Adelaide because there is no resupply on the Nullarbor. The Qinghai-Tibet Railway runs 44 hours. It is the shortest journey in this series, and the only one where the air outside the window would, without intervention, make the people inside seriously ill. The other 3 trains are unusual because of distance, time, or isolation. This one is unusual because of physics. At 5,072 meters, the atmosphere contains roughly half the oxygen molecules per breath as at sea level. That fact required an entirely new category of train design, a medical team that boards halfway through the journey, and an attendant who carries a personal oxygen tube in her front pocket as a matter of professional routine. The attendant reaches Lhasa. She steps off onto the platform, puts her tube in the disposal bin at the door, and waits for the return service to Xining. The permafrost under the tracks stays frozen because the thermosiphons are doing their job. The passengers on the next crossing will receive their tubes at Golmud. Some of them will put the tube aside. Some will connect it immediately. The attendant will know the difference before the train reaches Tanggula Pass. Subscribe for more engineering stories that reveal the logic beneath the surface.